What is up, Alien Army? I am Oculus, the alien next door, purveyor of esoteric lore. And on this channel, we discuss everything out of this world. So today we are going to be talking about the topic of time. And this is something that I personally have been a bit confused about, but I recently gained some insight and some clarity on what time exactly is. Yes, that's a new word. Write it down. Exactually. We are going to be talking about how time exists as a third dimensional construct and what time really is. It's not the linear straight line that people make it out to be. It's actually a spiral. So recently this thought came to me about different things like repetitive patterns and how people can sometimes repeat the same thing but only in different versions of the same scenario. So there might be different places, spaces, and individuals, but the concept is generally the same. This video, I do want to say, it might be a little all over the place because it's just going to be freestyling, but here we go. So the concept of time, especially when someone is dealing with paradigms, is that they essentially are moving along, right? And to their third dimensional ego mind, it might seem like that they are just moving forward, but the same things keep getting thrown in their path, sort of like a little obstacle course, if you will. But what's really going on is that the path is not a straight line, the path is a spiral. And I'm sure you have seen this written a lot of places, at least if you're into like the metaphysical genre. So when repeating paradigms occur, it's not that someone is moving forward like they're aging. Let's say they're 5, then they're 15, then they're 25, right? It might seem that way because their body essentially looks different and they might have different mental concepts and constructs going on depending on where they're at in their journey, what stage. But really, if we want to take a closer look at the concept of time, it is actually a spiral. So time exists by third dimensional standards. Time can be considered the fourth dimension. Okay, this is I believe Einstein said it, that fourth dimension was time. This is also what I personally really resonate with, is that time is the fourth dimension, where if you are predominantly in the fourth dimension, you can pick and choose what areas of time that you want to travel to. So time in the fifth dimension and above is essentially non-existent. Everything is happening at once. So if we want to think about, and this is what really prompted me to make this video, is that I've seen the movie Arrival. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but there might be some spoilers. So if you have not and you intend to, then I don't know, maybe this isn't the video for you. But essentially, now, you know, in movies in Hollywood and things like that, they convey messages that already are. So it's not like these things do not already exist. They do already exist, and they, residents in the fourth dimension coming down, basically tell you what is going on and what they're doing. But you know, in the third dimensional construct, in that little box, people are essentially like, well, you know, that's just fantasy, that's just an illusion, that's not how it really is, yada yada. But these things really do go on. It's just that the fourth dimensional satanic mafia do not allow most individuals to access these type of conditions where they would be able to jump through time and all of that. So regardless, the movie Arrival made me think. Now, it has something to do with this woman who is trying to understand and interpret the language of the heptapods. Oh, they were so adorable. She's trying to understand their language, and their language is essentially circular. It's not like written out the way that most languages on Earth are. You know, languages they can be written like this, they can be written up and down, they can be read both ways, left to right, right to left, depending on what language it is. But this alien language was circular. And so I started wondering about that, because this really prompted me to think, because we have 12 seasons, right? We have 24 hours in the day, which is a multiple of 12. And so these type of constructs, right, they are essentially telling time, right? They're telling you time. A calendar is telling you what time of the year it is, but the calendar in and of itself is not going straight, right? It's not moving along straight. Like, we don't have, after December, which is the last month of the year, what do we have? Then we start again at January. So why, if time really was a linear construct, why does it end at December and then not start with a totally different month that no one has ever heard of before? Why do the hands on the clock go around in a rotation of basically 12 cycles? Whether you use the military time or not, it will still be in like a rotation of 2 cycles of 12 to equal 24-hour day. So with the, let's say I'm going to use both examples. I'm going to use military time and I'm going to use yes, American time. I don't know. I don't know if other countries do the whole like 2 revolutions of 12, but I'm in the United States. That's what I was taught. So if we want to look at it that way, how come when the clock strikes 12, it doesn't an hour later strike 13 in, let's say, traditional time? And if you're using military time, because it goes from 2359, there's no 2400, right? It just goes, it resets at 0 hour. So this is something that I find interesting, especially esoterically, because our ways, our human ways, right? When you're in a human body, you're taught to tell time in a cyclical nature. You're not taught time as linear, but yet when you're spoken about in regards to like age or stages of life where you're at, why is it a straight line going forward that seemingly has no end, right? Well, I have come to the conclusion that that is an illusion, and I'm sure you have too, which is why you clicked the video. So being that we have calendar and we have clocks that are rotating cyclically, right? We even have the cycles of the year. Shortest daylight, at least where I'm at in the northern hemisphere, is December 21st. Longest daylight is June 21st, and it keeps going back to those two, right? So even if we want to look at the whole cycle, the earth is a cycle revolving around the sun every 365 or 366 days. It doesn't just go off on its own into like day number 367 here on earth, right? So this can help when someone is trying to regard what stage of life they're at. You essentially are never just moving forward without coming back around to where you were, in a previous cycle. So cycles will continue and they will spiral upwards. So if we want to think of, you're always elevating, right? You're always evolving because you're not going backwards and shrinking. You're moving forwards essentially and expanding, right? And the more you expand in each now moment, this is going to propel you upward in this spiral of time. But the linear concept of time does not teach that. So what I am talking about here today is that if you have a certain, let's say, you will always be faced with the same thing again along your journey in different cloakage. So if you are proceeding, if you are meandering along your journey, right, and then you come to a really good place, right, and you're like, oh shit, like this is so amazing. Let's say you were 5 years old and you tasted mint chocolate chip ice cream for the first time. You're like, oh my god, like that was the most brand new exciting taste you've ever had in your mouth. And then you're like, damn, like, then you're like 7 and you're like, nothing up until that point has beaten the taste of mint chocolate chip in your mouth. But then let's say you turn 10 and then you come back around because you're cycling. You eventually are going to reach the point where, let's say you're 10 years old and you taste sushi for the first time. And you're like, oh shit, like I can't believe that I had my taste buds activated the way that I did before when I tasted the mint chocolate chip ice cream for the first time. So there are going to be different cycles that you're going to come along with. So I used a positive example. obviously, when we're talking about paradigms that we are trying to break free of, we can also see this happening in a negative example. This is why paradigms are going to keep presenting themselves to you, obviously, until the energy has wound down and you have evolved past that paradigm. But when you move, when you're moving, when you're expanding, when you're evolving, as everyone always is constantly, essentially what's happening is that you seem to be like you're growing older, or you're changing and things like that, but it's like, no, you are actually just evolving in every now moment. So remember, the physical body, which is why they talk about like, how old are you, how young are you, like this person is 57 years young, this person is 57 years old, right? It doesn't matter. That's just how many years the body has been on earth. So the body, being that the body is physical, it's a physical vessel, it is going to show signs of how well you took care of that physical body. So you can be 57 years old and motherfuckers think you're 22, and you could be 57 years old and motherfuckers think you're like 102, right? So this is really sort of like the trap when you're trying to logically suggest to yourself that time does not exist, because there are so many things that seem like time is real and that things are getting older, right? And we always want that new freshness, but that new freshness always is, because in every moment we are growing and evolving. So when one has a paradigm and they are trying to break free of it, what's going to happen is that they might break free of that paradigm. They're like, okay, you know, they've studied Saturn and karmic ties and things like that, and they've ejected everything that doesn't resonate for the betterment of their soul. They've ejected that, and so now they're only accepting benevolence. Someone meets a toxic individual, right? I think everyone has met a toxic individual, right? And so you meet this toxic individual. Let's say you're 20 years old, you encounter a toxic individual, however it may be, and then you're like, okay, you know what, you reach the earth age of 22, and you're like, you know what, I'm never going to deal with someone like that again. So you set that intention, and you're like, okay, you've understood, you've grasped the concept of why you attracted that individual in the first place, and you're like, okay, you know what, I cleaned up me, I know what went on, so I am not going to attract that ever again. But what happens, okay, and this is Bashar talks about this a lot. Daryl Anka, he's known as Bashar. So he spoke on this, talking about a pattern will echo before it finally leaves you. And this is where I'm weaving up to in my little sermon here. So you're 22 years old, you met the toxic individual when you were 20, you said, I am not going to tolerate that ever again, wipe your hands of it, be gone, poof, be gone, motherfucker, right? And then you turn 22, right? But you're not really going like that, you're going 21, 22, and now you've elevated, right? Because you've recognized the toxic energy and you said you don't want to deal with that again. But then you come to this point in your cyclical timeline where you've spiraled upwards, but then boom, another toxic person presents themselves to you. And this is what Bashar talks about when a pattern echoes before it leaves, because essentially if you've noticed that you've attracted something that you don't like, because time is really cyclical and it's advancing upwards, because you've grown, you've expanded from dealing with toxic individuals, you're going to be presented with someone who might appear to be another toxic individual. And so how you get to respond to this new individual is basically saying, wait a second, like, I've encountered this before, just like you've encountered before the taste of mint chocolate chip ice cream and the taste of sushi. Then you're like, oh shit, this triggers a happy memory. That in itself might trigger you to want to step out of your comfort zone and try some more new food, right? Because you like that feeling. You're like, oh shit, if I taste something new, I kind of like it. So the opposite can be said about this paradigm with coming back around to meeting another toxic individual. So now, because this is an unfavorable paradigm, you don't want to deal with it, you simply allow yourself to observe it and you're like, wait a second, so I'm being presented with this again. The fault is not of your own. This is because time is cyclical, and depending where you're at on your journey, this new toxic individual could either insert themselves into your experience, or you can recognize it for what it is and you can be,
oh, I see you, Satan.
and you keep on moving. And then the next time, let's say you're 22, 23, 24, then you encounter someone else who you don't really think they're toxic, but because you have that stored memory, like, well, you know, this person might be displaying some toxic traits, then what would happen is that you question yourself and you can be like, okay, well, you know what, I stepped away from two potentially toxic situations. Now, what I see now is that this individual, they might be at a distance from you, so you can recognize toxicity from a mile away. So it'll present itself into your experience from afar. It'll be like at a distance, so it might be the same traits of these individuals. Let's say a friend of a friend, right, is, you know, this toxic individual, and your friend is telling you about this person. They're like, well, they do this, they do that, they said this, they said that, and you can recognize, right, because it's being presented to you again, because time is cyclical, but because you've evolved, you've grown from that, what's going to happen is that now you have the wisdom, you have the knowledge, you have the wherewithal to identify toxic traits, and then you can tell your friend, well, listen, I had this experience with someone who was exhibiting those type of traits, and that is really what I think you should do. And you could tell them how, you could give them advice if they ask for it, obviously, and let them know how they can potentially deal with that. So you might be presented with that again, but the more you evolve and cycle, those things might still present themselves to you. They will be further and they will be fewer and far between, right? So you're 24, then your friend told you about that toxic individual, right? Then you evolve 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. So now 31, right? Because you handled that so gracefully. So now what's happening is that if we want to picture, if you've ever seen in the book Power versus Force, I forget the author at this point, but I can maybe, I don't know, I'm probably going to leave like a little quote name. I'm going to leave the name on the bottom of the screen. That's what I'm going to do. So in Power versus Force, there's like a scale of emotions, right? And so also I believe in Abraham Hicks has this with the vortex, right, of different, the spirals, right? So we have a downward spiral and we have an upward spiral. So this is the same thing. So now, since you graduated and you elevated from that toxic individual that you recognize, what's going to happen is that you kind of started off down here, right? You sort of went with like a downward spiral, and everything was just like, whoa, it kept happening quick, like toxic, like you're being inundated with toxic people. But then as you grow and you expand, now it's like gradually you're in that upward spiral, right? So the spiral is getting larger because it's expanding upwards as your own consciousness expands. So that's why these are going to be fewer and farther in between. So what's going to happen is that you might witness, you might see a movie, which you're like, oh shit, if there was ever like a movie to sum up a particular dealing with someone that you had in your life, this would be it. And you're like, oh shit, the irony. But then it makes you laugh, right? Because now you're 31 years old and you're chilling, and you've defeated the toxic army, whatever, and you've told your friend, you've given them your knowledge, right? You're like, oh, this is how you spot a toxic motherfucker. And so then now it presents itself to you, and then you get to see the grandiose comedy of it all. Like, you see it on the movie screen, and it makes you laugh, and you're like, oh shit, I can't believe like I once dealt with a situation like that. It's so funny because now you see that it was never you, right? It was just, there was a portion of you that attracted that toxicity, and you let it in because you were still unconscious of what that was at that time. So that is essentially what happens with paradigms, how to break free. Like, you always respond differently because you can't expect the mirror's reflection to change if you're just sitting there and you're not doing anything, right? Because physical reality is a mirror. But as far as timelines and paradigms, ooh, I like that. That might be the title of the video. I don't know yet. But as far as timelines and paradigms, what's going to happen is that now you're in an upward spiral. So you're expanded, you're like letting a lot of positive energy in, but because your set point vibration is positive, more so than, let's say, when you were 20 and you first encountered that toxic individual, what's going to happen is that in that same type of energy, you're now, because you've graduated, you're, instead of like being in this little tight spiral, now you're in this like wide spiral, and you're spiraling upwards, and then you're going to expand your circle to gravitate benefic individuals to you. Okay, I don't know what the opposite of toxic would be, but let's just call them benefic. So then you're going to start to recognize what positive energy is that you want to deal with in another individual, because you've already recognized the negative energy. And as far as positive timelines, obviously, if something is working for you and you have that paradigm, like let's say you have, you know, like you're like, oh, every year around January 1st I get like this, like boom, like this uptick in energy and I'm feeling good, and something, I always have a financial windfall, right? You could even have something like that, and the more positive energy that you put into that, what's going to happen, that spiral, right, is going to spin faster and faster and faster. So you keep coming around to that, but only at different points. So because positive energy vibrates at a quicker level, because it's lighter, it's less dense, what's going to happen is, like, instead of every January 1st I receive a financial windfall, now it's going to be every first of the month I receive a financial windfall. Oh shit, every first of the week, which would be, I guess, Sunday if we want to use a calendar. Every Sunday I receive a financial windfall, and then soon it comes to the point where boom, like every first second of the day when you wake up, boom, you receive a financial windfall or something, whichever, I'm using different examples, but you can use whatever example you want. And this is because everything is repeating, everything is coming back around to you, but it's wearing different cloakage. So the more that you recognize that things again will present themselves to you, but it's how you are responding differently because you have elevated along that long spiral staircase, then there is really nothing to for you to think that you're stuck, or that you've attracted the same situation again, because essentially everything is all at once, past, present, future. If everything is happening now, but because our consciousness is focused on really like one set timeline, at a time, pretty much for most of us most of the time, then it's only going to appear as if the same thing is happening again and again, because you're spinning and these things are like gravitating towards you. But it's like, are you going to be caught in like a tornado of like a toxic individual's energy again, or are you just going to watch Twister on TV and be like, haha, glad that ain't me, right? So that, I don't know if that was really confusing, but yeah, I think I'm going to call this paradigms and timelines. I don't know. I just wanted to talk about that a little briefly, and that is it for this video. I am Oculus, the alien next door. Thank you for joining me on this little cylindrical excursion through time. We will chit chat again soon.